talked about it on the phone. But how you really feel about it, I don't really know.
What's your take on Cassavetes? 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 Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes?
Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film. I'm Elise, imprisoned inside of braces for as long as orthodontists are not allowed to see patients.
I'm Dave, imprisoned with a person who is in that state. And this week we are going to be looking at the Hollywood studios year by year. It's MGM 1932. And we've got a Jean Harlow double feature for you. We'll be talking about Red Dust and Red-Headed Woman.
Oh man, this is going to be a great episode, isn't it, Dave?
I would say so. Well, the movies were great anyway. Hopefully we can live up to them.
These movies are fantastic.
So MGM, you've had your doubts about them, or you did in 1930 anyway. 1931 they already started to turn it around, because we did Susan Lennox and Possessed, and those were great.
I was thinking about that. Well, I wasn't as crazy about Susan Lennox as you were, but it was definitely a big step up from what we had seen, perhaps arbitrarily seen from MGM before that. Some of our selections are based on knowing nothing about the movies, and some are, like this week, are based on familiarity.
We play it fast and loose here. We just act upon our whims.
These movies, I think I've only seen these once before, which was with you a few years ago. I was complaining that I hadn't seen many Jean Harlow movies, so we watched a few.
I am a diehard Jean Harlow fan. In fact, I believe one day we will get to her in our Acteurist Oeuvre Review. Now, there's a lot of people lined up before her, but one day we'll get back to these.
Yeah, it's very competitive for a spot in that feature.
She's so good. Talking about studios, MGM, they always, and Morden does this, right? He talks about Queens of the Lot, the dueling Queens of the Lot at MGM, and they always talk about Garbo, Norma Shearer, and Joan Crawford. Nobody ever mentions Jean Harlow, who probably made as many or more good movies as they did during this period of the early 30s.
Well, she probably wasn't competing with them for the same roles, though. She kind of had her own niche.
She did, but to me, she deserved a crown as well.
This really feels like the episode 1932 where MGM is hitting its stride and shows what a studio can do without auteurs. Victor Fleming, who directed Red Dust, is a well-known director.
Well, sure, this is MGM at its most typical, and that includes the type of directors that they use. These are people that have no profile whatsoever. However, if you look at the movies they made, Victor Fleming and Jack Conway, they both made incredible movies.
Fleming has a profile because he worked on Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, but not a good profile from those. I guess he replaced Cooker on Gone with the Wind, but he was not at all in charge of that film.
He was called in at Gable's request.
Yeah.
Causing the backstabbing by our friend David O. Selznick of his friend George Cukor.
Yeah, but if you look at Fleming's filmography, it's incredible. And Jack Conway as well. He is someone that never, ever gets discussed.
That's for sure.
But he made Libeled Lady. He made Love Crazy. He made Tale of Two Cities. I mean, this guy could do anything and do it at the top level in Hollywood.
The magic of these two movies, which are very different, very, very different movies, is in the chemistry between good directors, great stars, and amazing screenplays.
Yes, and we'll definitely talk about the screenwriters for these films, too.
I actually ended up making, you saw, I showed it to you, Dave, a little diagram of potential cross-influences between directors and screenwriters who had worked with each other in the production of the particular type of love triangle that we see in Red Dust.
A story structure that's dear to your heart, so I take you very seriously when you start doodling this way.
The love triangle?
I think we're going to have to take a photo of your crazy diagram and put it on Twitter.
Well, I might have to make a new one because this one's a little messy, but...
So Red Dust, let's start with that.
Screenwriter auteur in question here is John Mahan, or how the hell would you pronounce that?
John Lee Mahan.
Mahin, but although credited on this film for some reason just as plain old John Mahin.
Now, this guy is someone I don't want to like. He's a horrible human being, one of the arch right-wingers in Hollywood.
Oh, but such a fantastic screenwriter.
Can't help loving many of the movies, although he is responsible for Boomtown with Jack Conway, director of Red-Headed Woman, which is an absolutely terrible film. In general, a Mahin film is brilliantly written.
This is one of the things that I was wondering about watching this movie, because the neutrality with which the colonial subject is presented, you can read it as a blistering indictment of it or as a completely neutral acceptance of it.
I think it's a complete acceptance of it.
Sure, but it really doesn't have to be read that way.
No, I guess you could.
Presents it so baldly and nakedly without trying to prettify it.
Yeah, but don't forget, this is still in the era of the white man's burden talk. The idea that it's the lot of the colonial Superman to go out there and tame the world and push everyone around so that the global economy begins to ramp up the way everyone thinks it should.
Well, certainly that's how Clark Gable, our hero, takes it.
Exactly. No, it doesn't make it look pretty, that's for sure. So it gives you the material to criticize it from without if you wish to.
There's a definite contrast with something like The Letter, which actually gives you a much stronger basis for having an anti-colonial reading.
Absolutely, but The Letter definitely has a relationship to this film.
Oh, yes. Mahin, here's where my diagram comes in. So the basic fascinating material of love triangle in this movie, the characters themselves and the relationships between them are very Hawksian.
Yeah.
We've got Jean Harlow as the classic Hawksian woman who just masochistically hangs around until the hero deigns to acknowledge that he loves her.
Yeah, but I think she's a lot cooler than the Hawks women that we actually get.
Yeah, but also the way she's presented, the way they're pals together, the way that she has all of that snappy dialogue to kind of maintain some kind of dignity while she's doing this. It's all very, very Hawksian.
Yeah, sure.
Even in a way, you can see Gable as a Hawksian hero in that he's devoted to his work.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that. And it is kind of an interesting quirk of Hollywood history that they never worked together, I don't believe. Gable and Hawks.
Oh, Gable and Hawks. Huh. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know. Not famously in any way.
No, I don't think they did.
But then on top of that, you also have the High Sierra hero who's in love with a woman who's out of his class and therefore ignoring the woman within his class who is better for him.
Well, she's not really out of his class. Out of his social set, but he is also a rich guy.
Okay, that's true. But class, the way Hollywood movies and particularly MGM construct class.
Oh, because I really think it's important to look at this, right? Like, this is, again, part of the white man's burden aspect of it. This is a sacrifice that Gable is making for the good of the world, right? He is a rich guy. He should be equivalent to a rich person in America, but he's not because he lives this degraded life on a plantation. He takes on the characteristics of his filthy operation.
Sure, but you can't deny the fact that he and Harlow are being put in one bag as stars, as star personae.
Yeah, but don't you think it's interesting that he is being put in a social set with her? Because he's not someone who made this business. He was born into it. His dad owned it. He's just the boss's son who inherited this plantation.
You're talking about the characters. I'm talking about the stars. Although this is one of the very first movies that seems to be using Gable in a way that he would be used later on, familiarly, and to anticipate in some ways the way he gets used by Capra in It Happened One Night, which kind of sets his star persona going forward.
Gable is more multifaceted than you'd assume if you've only seen him in a few films, I think.
He's really, really, really great in this movie, especially considering his character is so very foul.
Again, Gable's a guy that I don't want to like. He doesn't have a great reputation as a human being, and the characters he played are often the kinds of people that I just don't want to like. But you can't help liking him.
He was homophobic. He got Kruger fired. Loretta Young said that he raped her.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, he seemed to have had a nice relationship going with Carol Lombard until that ended tragically. That's the extent of which I know anything about Clark Gable's private life.
There seems to be pretty proven evidence that he killed someone in a hit and run, and MGM covered that up as well.
Yeah, but Jimmy Stewart was an awful person too, politically. What these people are like as actors is an entirely different question from what they were like as human beings.
No, but that's what I'm saying. Gable isn't even playing the kind of characters I want to like, and you can't help liking him.
No, because he's such a great actor. He's such a great star. There's such an immense leap. Like when we did Susan Lennox, there's such an immense leap in what he is doing with this movie, and that could account for why he had this special relationship with Victor Fleming, because he knew that Fleming could bring things out in him as an actor that other directors who didn't care as much about working with him as material could. Like, obviously, Robert St. Leonard was more interested in what he was doing with Garbo and Susan Lennox, right?
Yeah, and the producers who put that film together, too. Gable was not yet thought of as a major property in 1931, but by 1932 you can see that he is.
So anyway, back to the love triangle plot. I had thought that woman hanging around until the tough guy admits that he loves her, I thought Jules Furthman had invented that in Docks of New York.
Okay.
Jules Furthman, who then comes to work with Howard Hawks after Sternberg, well, actually a bit concurrently, but for the most part after Sternberg, then kind of perfects this plot, if you like it, which I don't, in Only Angels Have Wings, and then revisits it in To Have and Have Not, very famously with Bogart and Bacall and Hawks again. But I guess John Lee Mahan comes up with this again, seemingly by himself, because there doesn't seem to be enough of a relationship between Docks of New York and Red Dust in order for it to be an influence. And Mahan, interestingly, had worked with Hawks. He worked on, same year, uncredited though, but Wikipedia does put him as the co-writer along with Hawks on Tiger Shark, which is another love triangle movie.
It is, but a very different kind of love triangle.
Sure, but it's two guys fighting over a woman, and one of them wants to sacrifice for the other one, although it doesn't work out as well as it does in this movie.
No, it doesn't. And it's not really an equilateral triangle either, is it?
Well,
Edward G. Robinson's just a schlub.
I guess so. Well, we can talk about how equilateral this triangle is.
I think this triangle's pretty equilateral. It's not a good quadrangle. Jean Raymond really gets thrown under the bus in this film. But the two women both have appeal, and Gable, obviously, at the center does as well.
Well, yeah, because it's a quadrangle. It's not just a triangle.
Right.
A quadrangle which few writers, other than late Henry James, have attempted this form. The most complex of the triangle forms, the quadrangle.
Well, Libeled Lady does a pretty good job with it in many ways.
Later, he again works Mahan with Howard Hawks, but as two uncredited screenwriters on Fleming's Test Pilot.
Yeah, that's an amazing film.
Which is another arrow leading in the direction of Only Angels Have Wings, because that was Hawks's attempt to redo Test Pilot, although you and I both preferred Test Pilot, which is again a love triangle movie.
Crying, terrible shame, and Andrew Sarris obviously is entirely to blame for this, that Test Pilot is not a beloved film, and Only Angels Have Wings is.
I just want us to think about the fact, as we're going into talking about this movie, that so many of these star vehicles for men, directed by manly men directors like Howard Hawks and Victor Fleming, were in fact love triangle movies just like A Woman's Picture. And that is the whole interest of this movie. You might throw in some kind of overweening concern about the man's profession so that could be a conflict, right? But they're basically love triangle movies.
Yeah, for sure. And Victor Fleming, again, he too wasn't just making He-Man movies. He made Bombshell, one of Harlow's greatest films, the year after this.
And John Mahan did the screenplay for A Star Is Born. The Wellman Star Is Born.
That's right.
He did a couple of Janet Gaynor movies. So he wasn't only just entrusted to Clark Gable.
No, that's true.
And The Star Is Born is another great screenplay.
No, they almost all are. It's really just Boomtown. I don't know what happened. It's like a Twitter rant or something. It's just an anti-New Deal screed.
Yeah, no one needed to be cut loose to do that.
No.
Who wants as we've said before, who wants anybody's bald screeds? I don't even want Sternberg's bald screeds about his ideas about the world.
No, and that one's a quadrangle. It's got Spencer Tracy, Gable, Claudette Colbert, and Hedy Lamarr all totally wasted in a fiasco of a film.
Sad.
So the setting is a rubber plantation, as we sort of alluded to earlier. They don't exactly say where it is.
What do you say, 3 hours to...
To Saigon, they call it. Saigon.
Right, that's where.
So I don't know if it's in Malaya or if it's in Vietnam or Laos or Cambodia. I don't really know enough about where rubber plantations, where they can be.
We don't know anything about it.
No.
So, except for movies. Gable is introduced to us as a rough and surly guy working those lazy coolies.
Oh man, it is
as he must.
Intensely racist film, obviously, that we have to foreground that because...
The coolies, the word comes up again and again and again. But it's also anti-anything that's not American because the French get in for it too. This Guidon guy.
Donald Crisp. You don't usually see Donald Crisp playing this kind of character.
And you barely see him conscious in the movie, but he's referred to a lot.
He gets punched a bunch of times, yeah.
So he's just a drunken louse who is wrecking Gable's business.
Terrible.
But who is he?
He's obviously the second in command. He's falling down on the job. He's too drunk now. Presumably in the past, he was fairly good at his job, no longer. And Gable keeps having to make up for his mistakes. We see these rubber trees. They've been tapped too early, apparently. Gable can tell that just by swishing them around in his mouth. Rubber milk. Spits it out. It is kind of interesting just on that level. This is the only movie I've ever seen that shows you what they do to create rubber.
Yeah, and this is, of course, just supposed to be an intriguing curiosity. If anything, it's supposed to make us sympathetic toward the verdant white man who has to bring us these materials and wreck his glorious white life that he could have, and not sympathetic towards the natives who are being exploited and abused.
No, it has no sympathy whatsoever, neither did John Lee Mahan. Gable could be living on the Hudson River, 25 miles from New York.
But he sacrifices everything to bring us rubber baby nipples, which, by the way, we now know are not nearly as good as human nipples.
Just so some old woman can take a hot water bottle to bed.
And tires. They do discuss tires.
Yeah, that's right.
Like a bunch of really, really horrible things. Like rubber should never have been invented. Except, medical supplies. I guess it's good for medical supplies.
Leave it in the trees.
Alright, so that's the setting.
He has his trusted assistant, Mac, who's been there forever with him as well, but he doesn't seem to have a foreman kind of role. He's not assertive. He's just a good confidant.
Sure.
Into this little menage comes Jean Harlow.
Yeah, who is a prostitute.
Vantine is her name, which is a great name.
We can't get through an episode without a prostitute appearing in our movies.
No, it's
Hollywood
true.
Just loved it.
Especially in the pre-code era, when they could be blatant about it. She is on this little tugboat thing that comes back and forth with supplies. It's captained by a guy they call Limey, and he is British, Cockney. She out and out states that it's not her habit to make these little trips, but things were getting a little hot with the police in Saigon.
So she just wants to lie low like a gangster.
Brought back by Guidon. I guess that's an important point, right? So she tags along with him, but not as his playmate in any way.
No, she won't touch him.
She makes it clear that he is too disgusting for her.
She
and
does.
He sure is.
She's selective. The reason she can't go back right away no matter what they do is that the ship won't come again for 3 weeks or something. Anyway, they discover her by dumping
Guidon in his bed, but she's already in there.
The drunk Guidon off. She tries to appeal to Gable to at least remove him from the room so she can get some sleep without worrying about being harassed, but Gable just doesn't. Right off the bat, he is surfeited with prostitutes. He's had so many all his life because, again, this is the only kind of, you can't have a decent wife. He
explains later on that his father did have his mother there, and very, very early in Gable's life, they buried her, and Gable thought they were digging a well. He was young enough that he didn't really understand what was going on.
He seems to have lost interest in sex. He seems to be, completely just devoting himself to his work now.
Yeah, he's trying to make something major out of his plantation because there's nothing else for him to do. He goes down and lets off steam in Saigon.
But he doesn't want Saigon to come up there.
He's not in the mood right now.
Right. Harlow then wanders. We have to accept as part of the plot that she instantly falls in love with Gable because he's cute.
Yeah.
As, often happens in Hollywood movies. I, in fact, love the way that Hollywood movies at this time are so frank about people just falling hopelessly, I will die for you in love with other people based on physical attraction alone.
Sure.
It's awesome. It's like a wonderful basis for thinking about human life and relationships. That's not sarcastic. I actually mean that.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Why not?
And they have great chemistry.
It's democratic sex, as Elizabeth Kendall says in The Runaway Bride.
They would make many movies together. They probably would have made even more if Harlow hadn't died in 1937. So yes, their rapport, I mean, they get off to a rocky start. She wants to get in on his good side, but the only way she knows how to do that is to keep trying to kid him out of his bad mood. And
which she does definitely need.
It comes close, though, to going really badly because he keeps threatening to beat her up and throw her into an outhouse.
I was thinking about this and thinking about MGM's personality as a studio, right? Because that's what this series is supposed to be about, though sometimes we wander off from that when we can't do it, when the movies won't allow it. I was thinking about how the basis of human relationships in this movie extend from the basis of all human relationships in the world. Romantic relationships, I mean, are part and parcel of how all relationships work in this world as they're presented, which is that they're sadomasochistic. And ultimately, a little bit, that's transcended by the end of the movie, but the basis of romantic attraction, like the basis of economic exploitation in the movie, relations are basically sadomasochistic. And how that's also the case in Red-Headed Woman in a different way. And how that kind of actually fits in, even though in a lot of ways, this movie is atypical of MGM. Although again, we'll talk about how the class relations aren't as simple as all of that.
If we're talking about studio personalities, MGM, it does have this reputation of more stars than there are in the heavens, and that's persistent through the 30s into the 40s. But there is a definite dividing line that...
Oh, that's what I was going to say. How that seems like part and parcel of MGM's family values-based conservatism. Anytime sex is dealt with as a subject, and they do deal with it very well, it has a sadomasochistic quality. And Mahan also worked on the MGM version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
He sure did.
Which is the uber example of that, and how already that way of dealing with sexuality is present at MGM, even though the Mayer family values period isn't fully in force yet.
Yeah, because there is Thalberg, and Thalberg is a countervailing force. He is conservative on economic issues, I think, probably, just as much as Mayer was, or almost as much. But in terms of how you present sex, the Thalberg era is quite different. MGM, in general, it is relying on vivacity of star combinations and sexual chemistry. That is the one thing that is consistent throughout its run.
But that chemistry is often, in their best movies, very violent. It certainly is with Joan Crawford and Clark Gable, and differently with him and Harlow in this movie. I don't know if that carries through in their other movies. With Crawford, it's more of a equal battle. I'm thinking of Strange Cargo.
Yeah, well that...
in particular.
That movie doesn't fit into any... category, I don't think.
Well, other than it being...
Borzage.
Yeah, but other than it being an apotheosis of the Gable and Crawford coupling. Sorry, but to get back to this movie. That's what I wanted to say, that this sadomasochistic presentation of human relationships is and particularly sexual relationships, is the flip side of MGM's conservatism.
This is not exclusive to MGM. Pre-code films at a lot of studios have this feel to them, right? We're going to show you some really sexually charged stuff, but you are supposed to feel a bit filthy about it.
Talking about sadomasochistic is in particular just what you were saying, though, the way that Gable is constantly physically threatening Harlow, and she just takes it.
Yes, although it is kind of different in this film that it's all talk. And
different than what?
Well, than Red-Headed Woman.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's a very different film. I thought you meant different than Gable in other movies.
Well, he does hit women in other movies, and he doesn't in this one. Like, he only gets hit and shot by women in this movie.
Well, it's sort of all dissipated, all of that frightening tension between them is dissipated in this relationship that develops between them, almost like a brother and sister fighting, although he has the upper hand.
He does, but I don't feel like Harlow is so helpless in this battle here as you seem to be implying. I think when they have that fight about the Roquefort, and he does threaten to hit her several times, she basically just moves in on him and says, "You and what army is going to throw me out of here?" And he backs backs down at that point. She's not cowed by him ever.
He says that after Mary Astor slaps him, he says that he likes women who fight back, and he clearly likes them both on this basis, and he seems to only realize his sexual interest in Mary Astor after she wallops him. I mean, it's not just sadistic of him toward Harlow, the basis of the relationship, but he seems to be able to, when he's the one who's infatuated, develop the same kind of dynamic.
Again, he is looking for an equal sparring partner.
Sure.
But he really will dish it out, verbally anyway, in this film only. Pretty tough stuff to take, I would think.
Then we also have the character of the Chinese servant,
Hoy is the
house
character's
servant.
name. Willie Fung, I think, is the actor's name. He turns up in a lot of movies in the 30s, and obviously he is a very...
horrifying racist stereotype.
Yes.
But once you just accept that and treat him as a movie grotesque,
Yeah.
which white people can play too, he is very effective as a dramatic device and actually develops a weird sort of rapport with Jean Harlow.
Sure.
They are thrown together in a lot of scenes doing comedy together.
Oh, and I like his interaction with Mary Astor, too, when he's showing her how primitive the shower setup is. I mean, he knows what he's doing, right? I mean, he knows that he's...
The actor.
Teasing her. Well, the actor and the character, I think the character is... He is being made fun of by the film. There's no getting away from that, and that is an appalling relic of 1932. But he also knows that these people have never seen such basic house furnishings, and he's kind of delighting in the fact that this prim lady is going to have to take a shower in a barrel.
Well, here's the thing. First of all...
Or not even in a barrel. That's Harlow's innovation. She's supposed to just scoop out of the barrel.
First of all, these stereotypes are not, or at least this kind of particular stereotype, they are not racial. They're class-based. The witless servant is way older than racial stereotypes.
Yeah, of course, but the way that race gets superimposed upon these class stereotypes is something to remark upon.
And furthermore, of course it's worth remarking upon, but what I'm saying is, furthermore, this character has been a dramatic device because unequal relationships between human beings has existed since drama began.
Yeah.
And he serves a dramatic role in the plot, which is very much it's a very well-made plot.
Yeah, it's the mocking servant.
Yes, and within what are these horrifying witless servant stereotypes, there is built into this archetype a sort of impotent criticism of the social system. It's like built into the plot that there is a criticism of this social system, of these people who are the heroes of the plot, and it's impotent because it's like dramatically cathartic and it's not expected to actually change anything.
No, if it makes you feel any better to laugh at the people who are exploiting you, then go ahead. That's basically all you're allowed to do. So that's the status quo at the moment. I do love this scene between them. Harlow Gable, it sets the tone for the way they're going to behave with each other in a lot of films. They do have a kind of camaraderie, but also a strong sexual chemistry. And her battle with him about Roquefort cheese and how it's
I'm just trying to tell you. A lot of people will be interested to know this.
Yeah, she was reading up on how sheep are tortured to make Roquefort cheese, which is kind of an interesting 21st century kind of discussion that you might get on Twitter or something. And I'm sure it's true. Obviously, dairy production is monstrous in all forms.
It reminds me of that line in Harvey, which we watched recently. You should let the woman talk. She might have some interesting news items.
But it's really when she says, "You and what army is gonna push me out of here?" That's when he loosens up, and then he decides, well, maybe I will take her on my lap and see what happens.
Well, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, well,
that's
we know.
What happens.
Yeah, that's the arrangement they come to for a few weeks, and then when the ship comes, though, his understanding anyway is that she is leaving as soon as she can, but they're gonna have sex until then.
Actually, in a way, it's like the structure of Four Daughters.
In what way?
In that the two people who should come together, and then somebody arrives that completely throws it off course.
Yeah, that's interesting, sure.
Although, after this, we see him seeing her off, and we realize that he has not...
No, he hasn't processed it at all.
No, he hasn't processed it at all. On her side, she recognizes that they ought to be together, and she's correct, but he is still stuck in his ideas about gender.
No, he pays her off as a prostitute.
Yeah.
And she tries to not take it, and he just keeps pushing it at her, unfortunately.
And the movie is, of course, on her side.
Yeah, which is something to remark upon. It is unambiguously pro-Harlow, pro-Vantine. There's no judgment of her in any way. She is a great person.
She knows what's up, and she spends the whole movie hanging around saying what's up.
Yeah, and she has to take some insults throughout the film.
Lots of insults from everybody.
The movie does not feel that they are justified. She's just been making her way as best she can, and she is deserving of love.
Sure.
She doesn't need to be punished in any way.
Well, of course, as we've said, the fallen woman and the prostitute stereotype, at least in these early pre-code movies, as she was on the stage, is the villain who can always be forgiven.
Yeah.
Or the sinner who can always be forgiven.
But definitely not villain. She is not treated in any way as a villain in this film. She is the protagonist, I would say, of the film, even though we meet her after Gable.
Yeah, even though it's ostensibly Gable.
Yeah, but I do feel like what happens with her is more important.
Now, speaking of class, and the ambiguity of class in this movie, and the shiftiness of it, we were reading up on Jean Harlow, and Harlow came from a wealthy family.
Yeah, on her mother's side, anyway.
Where on earth did this accent come from, and when did they decide to start casting her as the platinum blonde tart?
Well, look, she's all over the place in her early roles. Capra has her as the heiress in Platinum Blonde.
Yeah, but these two movies seem more characteristic of where her persona went.
Yeah, that's true.
What is that voice? Where did that come from? What is that?
Sure, other people have remarked upon this before, but basically what Harlow's archetypal star persona is, now there are lots of variations on it, but she's basically Mae West except actually sexy.
Okay, yeah, Mae West was certainly doing a burlesque of sex. Is Harlow doing less of a burlesque of sex? She's younger.
She's just actually really good looking. Mae West is not. That's part of the joke.
Well, see, I disagree. Not about Mae West. I don't have any thoughts on Mae West's appearance. But Jean Harlow is very, very strange looking to me. You find her attractive.
Yes, of course I do.
I find her very, very strange.
Okay.
So we have to depart on that.
Okay. But it feels to me like she's actually modeled her voice on Mae West.
Well, that's another thing Kendall talks about in The Runaway Bride, how much early 30s actresses were influenced by Mae West. When is the first West movie? Is it as early as 30 or something?
She's also a vaudeville and Broadway star before that, right? Like in 1928, she's making headlines for baudy performances on Broadway.
But you've heard Mae West's voice. It doesn't sound anything like Jean Harlow's voice.
A little bit. I think it does sound a bit like
Jean Harlow's doing a very baby version of that voice.
Yeah, sure.
Mae West has like a husky, almost mannish voice.
All right. Well, maybe I'm wrong. But I don't know where her voice came from. I guess there are probably biographies of Jean Harlow, which we could read.
And why she decided to go with this particular persona, what film it was that clinched this, or if this is something that the studio wanted her to do. Anyway, well, they had a few women who could play lower class, a few actresses who could play lower class at MGM. Crawford could, but more like a working girl.
Yeah, but Harlow does that too, right? Like Wife versus Secretary, she's amazing in that movie as classic 30s super competent office girl.
That's true, that's true.
She could do that too. She could do basically anything they asked her to do. Class
is amazingly flexible with these stars. They can, without changing a hair of what they're doing, they can be cast as upper class or lower class from movie to movie.
Yeah, I mean, in Wife versus Secretary, Gable is playing the publishing magnate. And he suits that role too.
And is that a commentary on America or just on Hollywood's lack of interest in veracity? Or both?
Maybe both. And as she exits, ostensibly forever, although he says he'll see her in Saigon next time he's down there, and he'll have some more money for her, Jean Raymond and Mary Astor arrive, and we've heard that they are coming, or we've heard that Jean Raymond is coming. Gable has no idea that this man is married, but he's brought in a surveyor, a professional man, to do some complicated technical work for him on the plantation.
There's absolutely an almost Wuthering Heights-style dichotomy between these two couples, if you want to call them that.
Yeah.
Or pairs, in which they represent what is civilized, Mary Astor and her husband.
Yeah.
And Gable and Harlow represent what is not civilized.
Elemental forces.
But Gable
of raw exploitation.
Gable is conflicted about this. He is still clinging to the ideals of, I'm going to go ahead and say that one little line he has about his mother is the whole Freudian explanation of everything.
Yeah, the family romance is absolutely in play here. Mary Astor reminds him of his mother, and he wants to fuck her.
And the civilized values that she represents, and he wants to fuck those. And that's why he can't just accept that he himself has more of a rapport with Harlow.
Now, it's a subtle performance by Gable, because he's not just putting on an act for Mary Astor. He does seem to be... It's a different side of him coming out when he's with her.
But not as much of a fun side.
No, it's not as appealing to the audience.
That's
but it doesn't feel like he's just trying to con her by talking a little more fancily with her.
That's what feels very Hawksian, again, about the Harlow and Gable relationship, is that they have fun together, and that is the basis of their relationship.
Yep.
And it also feels like, again, this is something I'm thinking about because of reading the Kendall book. In many ways, it's a proto-screwball comedy. It's a melodrama that has a screwball comedy inside of it that at the end flips into a screwball comedy with a melodrama inside of it.
Yeah, it's a really wonderful movie. Everyone should see it. It was remade in the 50s by John Ford as Mogambo, with a different kind of hardcore white supremacist setting and tone to it in Africa, with Gable again, but this time with Ava Gardner in the Harlow role and Grace Kelly in the Mary Astor role. It's not a bad film, but certainly does not compare favorably with Red Dust. And it doesn't feel nearly as much like it's got that screwball comedy element to it in the 50s.
The 50s were not good for screwball comedy.
Yeah, it's a different time, for sure. And John Ford just doesn't have a comedy touch. So you can see that Fleming certainly does.
People don't agree with you there about John Ford. He thinks he has great comedy routines.
Nobody thinks that.
They do. He does put comedy in all of his westerns.
He's got knockabout, roughneck
I thought people did
antics.
think that.
If they like that kind of stuff, but that's not screwball comedy.
No, I didn't say it was.
That's not rapid fire banter like in a screwball comedy. It's just a bunch of oafish guys acting stupid and drunk.
50s had its own style of comedy.
It did, that's for sure. But John Ford isn't it. This couple arrives. We know right away what they're like when we see that they've brought tennis rackets with them.
Which Gable gives the fisheye to.
Oh yeah, he's disgusted. And I mean, all kinds of terrible things are dawning upon him as he enters their bedchamber. Jean Raymond can't even get up properly. He's infected with malaria. Gable knows it right away. And then, even worse, there's a woman getting ready in the boudoir. Who the fuck is this?
This is another big Hawksian plot point. The woman who is where she doesn't belong and is going to interfere with the men doing their work.
So Jean Raymond did not inform anyone that there would be 2 lodgers in his bedroom, and everyone just has to react around that. But of course, all of that's short-circuited by the fact that Raymond has a good chance of dying here. He's already feverish and dizzy.
And then, of course, after they show up in this state at the plantation house, or whatever you call that, then Jean Harlow comes back.
Yeah, because the tugboat has had an unfortunate accident, and it'll be 5 or 6 weeks before the replacement part can be brought up from the big city.
And so, as Harlow says, this is going to be a great setting for a nice little comedy or drama or what have you.
Here we see, this is something that you get in lots of films of the era. It's really women who are in charge of policing class boundaries, right? So Mary Astor is the person who makes all of this real, that there's class mixing going on here.
That's because men can fuck between class boundaries. That's
exactly.
That's why they can move between them.
Yeah, women are supposed to be domestic angels, the middle-class woman anyway, an upper middle-class woman. And so they are supposed to be looking with hawk-eyed attention to make sure that all the proprieties are respected. And they're not being respected at all on this plantation at the moment. Harlow has to make herself scarce.
But it's also, it becomes an interesting point. Gable is so doggedly concerned with her not contaminating Mary Astor with her vulgar presence, and so fixated on hiding her and keeping her quiet, that it almost becomes like she's a manifestation of his own, well, of course, that's what women like this are, for men like that, a psychological manifestation of his own sexuality, shameful sexuality that he doesn't want the Mary Astors and mothers of the world to know about.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, right? Because there's nothing other than a Freudian explanation for this. He is the boss. It doesn't matter one fucking bit what Mary Astor thinks. There's no one who's going to take his plantation away from him if he's got a prostitute on the grounds. So it's really just about not being found out by America or by the white world that he's allowed this to happen and is participating in it.
Well, sure, you can give a racial explanation of it, or you can give a Freudian explanation of it. They're not mutually contradictory.
But I'm just saying, in most movies, they would take the easier route, and it would be, okay, Gable can't let this woman find out because she's the wife of his boss or something.
Right.
Here, there's absolutely no economic consequence to him being found out. It's just something that he lives in terror of, and that plays into why he is so into Mary Astor.
And ultimately the reason he belongs with Harlow is that he can express this shameful within the Astor context, but not ultimately to him within his own context, this shameful sexuality with her. He doesn't have to be ashamed of it. He can show his true colors.
Yeah.
Which are actually very, very innocent, because the way they relate to each other in this movie are like children.
They're
fun.
Like
kids.
Yeah.
And that also plays into the Freudian reading of the movie, because Mary Astor is the grown-up. Her husband is in a childlike relationship to her.
He's in an arrested state, yes, definitely.
Clark Gable's in a childlike relationship to her, and Clark Gable and Jean Harlow are children together.
They're having the Stanley Cavell screwball kind of relationship.
Yeah, exactly. So being children is not incompatible with enjoying sex. In fact, the movie is saying that these two things actually have to go together. You know what I meant by that.
Yeah.
Metaphorically being children.
That's right. At least it's
I wasn't advocating that children should have sex.
No.
Just want to make that clear.
And here we get to see a bunch of different facets of the Gable persona, right? So he is blunt about what's going on here. There's a chance Raymond may die. He barks orders at everybody. He says, get him to bed, give him these pills. We'll see if he makes it. If he follows orders, maybe he'll get through it. And then he says, nothing else I can do right now. I'm going to go look at my trees again. Mary Astor thinks he's being incredibly callous and smacks him in the face.
Well, she's hyper-privileged.
Even says that here's the reality. I hired this guy to do an important job and he may die. He's a damaged asset right now. So I'm going to go take care of the things that I really can control right now. She's appalled by this. But then when it is time for him to really get in there and be the medic on the grounds, which he is, he's an incredibly nurturing person, and he really does take incredible care of Raymond.
Well,
and we even see him taking care of one of his terribly exploited workforce members, right? Like he stitches him up.
He's a nice slave owner.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're being lazy, he will chase you around with a stick, but, if you're hurt, he will repair you.
Yeah.
You are an asset after all. But the way it works for Gable's persona and his performance when he is put in this nurturing role is what anticipates Capra's use of him. It Happened One Night, right? And shows us that
he's not just Nick the chauffeur.
It shows us that he's not just Nick the chauffeur.
No, he can be very tender.
And that becomes the Gable persona, that he is this hard, rough man who, with disreputable views and sexuality, but he is also capable of being more maternal than any woman.
Yeah, exactly. And it works. He does cure Gene Raymond. And Gene Raymond's an interesting figure in Hollywood history. I actually really like him a lot as an actor. He doesn't get to do a whole lot in this film. And he often does play a kind of other man role, but he did get to star in certain films, and he's very good in some of them, like Zoo in Budapest, and the Borzage Smilin' Through, which he did with his wife, Janet MacDonald, in 1941. He never solidified into an A-list star, and he often is kind of a supporting character, but then he'll just every once in a while get a starring role. There aren't that many people who fit into that category.
So the movie just develops along the plot line that we've sketched out, but what's important about it, which is another very Hoxian thing, is how the scenes are actually written and performed.
We can't really give you that all that much. You really have to see it and get the texture of the film. It's beautiful looking as well.
Is it a James Wong Howe? Let me look.
I don't think so.
Oh, Harold Rawson.
And Arthur Edison.
Rawson is a name I know.
Well, Arthur Edison is a name I know very well. He did Maltese Falcon and a lot of films at Warner Brothers. So yeah, no, both of those guys are famous cinematographers. And
Rawson did Dogs of New York, among lots of other things. But that must be where I saw the name recently. So yeah, very, very great cinematographers.
The repartee is incredible.
The movie does not pass the Bechdel test, but it doesn't really pass it for either gender. It's just one of those love triangle movies where if the two rivals are in the room, all they're going to talk about is the other person.
Yes, that's
in
true.
The triangle.
Or avoid talking about it in Gable and Raymond's case.
Right. But that is a nice scene between Jean Harlow and Mary Astor, and when Mary Astor is being tormented by her guilt at being attracted to Gable.
Yeah.
Being tempted by this relationship, and Harlow, despite her jealousy,
fixes her a drink.
Yeah, comes around and shows that she's a really nice kid.
Yeah, she knows what it's all about.
And actually, by the end of the movie, when Gable is doing his sacrifice scene where he's going to blow off Mary Astor, this is actually a really interestingly complex version of that scene that, most famously done in the Gable movie, Camille, where the sexually contaminated protagonist has to sacrifice their relationship with the person that they will drag down to their level otherwise, right?
Yeah.
They do so by pretending to revert to type. But this is a really complex version of that because he is pretending to do a version of something that he's really doing in a way that Mary Astor can't understand, because he actually really does care about Jean Harlow. I think he actually cares equally about the two women, but there's one that is a better choice in his circumstances.
Yeah, exactly. And the movie does a great job of giving that some weight. I do think Mary Astor's really good in her role, too.
And then Harlow plays that scene when Mary Astor shows up and sees them together as... Well, she tells him, fine, you still have your chance to go back to her. Right?
Yeah.
So it seems like she's actually reconciled and over this. Like, she's not going to be permanently heartbroken if Gable goes off with this other woman.
Well, not only that, she wants him, if he's going to choose her, she wants him to really choose her. And she's not going to do anything to sabotage anyone else's life, unlike the way she behaves in Red-Headed Woman, or unlike... even more so, our pal Marco from last week's film, The Idol, just fucking everyone's life up purposefully and not so purposefully, just by blurting out stupid truths at the wrong time. She really does think 3 moves ahead, and when she really wants to be convincing about something, she comes up with some great stories that will work and smooth things over. And even, it's kind of interesting how many similar things happen in Red Dust and Red-Headed Woman, despite them being so 180 degrees opposed films.
Sure.
A man gets shot in both of them.
Yeah, I noticed that.
It's quite interesting.
How do we interpret what happens here where Mary Astor decides that, well, for the same reason, she decides to shoot Gable because, well, not for the same reason, but not for the same reason. She decides to shoot him because he has fucked her and is now not going to make good on that he's treated her like a whore, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's pretty straightforward. And the film is not exactly thrilled with Mary Astor's character.
No, it doesn't endorse this at all.
No, but it doesn't judge her too harshly either, right? I mean, nothing's going to happen to her. She's going to go off and have a normal life. She's not a psycho.
I think
she is, I think, probably. If you shoot someone, you are, but not in the film's eyes.
I don't agree entirely. I don't think it judges her harshly, but I think it puts her in perspective and makes us, as with Gable, see her as kind of a ridiculous woman.
Yeah, well, she can't get out of her mental prison. Her class has stunted her brain.
And the way her sexuality relates to that.
Her brain and her emotion. She can't take a joke.
Yeah, she can't take a joke.
Well, that's a big problem in 30s movies. If you can't take a joke, you're not a main character.
You don't mean that Gable's sleeping with her and then turning around and sleeping with Harlow, that's the joke.
Well, you should treat that as a joke. Harlow would.
Sure.
Right?
Well, Harlow is definitely the person who is the most psychologically well-developed in this movie. And she's just waiting for Gable to get over his hang-ups, basically.
Yeah, she understands understands human nature. And Gable eventually does as well, his own and others, and he's willing to just deal with everything and get on with a good life. And he has to get shot in the process.
And he takes that as a joke.
Yeah, he does.
He absolutely takes it as a joke.
It makes you feel any better. It's fairly consistent in Hollywood history, I guess. Protagonists who can't take a joke are few and far between.
I've got to disagree with you there, Dave. Betty Davis in The Letter can't take a joke. Joan Crawford in the second Possessed, Curtis Bernhardt's Possessed, can't take a joke. No noir hero can take a joke. There are a lot of Hollywood protagonists. Noir genre is the American genre where the protagonist cannot take a joke.
Yes, okay, I agree with you there. And
that's why it all flips around, and we've got the screwball comedy at the end encapsulating this melodrama.
It overwhelms the melodrama.
Yeah.
Which is amazing.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah. Red Dust.
Amazing, great, 5-star film. This next film, I said we had watched these once together. I think that's the only time I'd seen them before. I remembered liking them a lot. I completely misremembered their plots, particularly Red Dust. I really, really misremembered that plot. I remembered Mary Astor as deciding to leave Clark Gable.
Oh, really?
And that's how he became disillusioned about her.
No.
Not at all.
No, he has his big conversion moment when he hears Gene Raymond talking about the silly life they're gonna lead together on the Hudson River with all of their wealthy friends.
Yeah.
Before they kill the tiger, which is a brutal scene.
Yeah.
Got that poor cow just sitting there as
bait.
Yeah, it's horrifying.
Redheaded Woman, I misremembered. Like, I anticipated it ending in the same way I anticipated it ending the first time I saw it, and then got the same shock that that's not the ending. But, which, by the way, means that if you haven't seen Redheaded Woman before, go watch it now. It's actually more fun to watch it if you don't know how it ends.
Yeah.
Much more fun.
You can't anticipate how this movie's gonna go. I like it more probably every time I see it, actually. Now, it's written by Anita Loos, which is really important.
Well, it's based on a novel by a best-selling woman author, so this is again a movie very much in its raw material about women policing class and sex, right down to the fact that the original material is written by a woman for women.
Yeah.
But Anita Loos reshapes it into something much more interesting.
And it's directed by Jack Conway. Again, I can't stress enough how wonderful his career is.
What else has he done?
Libeled Lady, one of the great screwball comedies, with Jean Harlow again. He did Tale of Two Cities, one of the great Dickens adaptations. Probably, maybe the best Dickens adaptation.
That's the one that Selznick oversaw?
Yeah. And he did Love Crazy, one of the most underrated and insane of the Powell Loy films. The Hucksters. I love The Hucksters, too. That's a great late 40s Gable movie about the ad industry, with Sidney Greenstreet horking up a loogie on the table and comparing that to a good ad campaign.
Well, in that case, I am willing to say that Anita Loos and Jack Conway are probably the co-auteurs of this movie.
Jack Conway is a comedy master.
Well, this isn't exactly a comedy, although actually Jean Harlow is giving a comedic performance. She's like a Moliere humor.
Yeah, no, this is one of the great comedic performances. She's an
absolute caricature of a comic villain.
One thing that really struck me this time, compare this film to The Women, also written by Anita Loos.
Well, it was co-written, and Anita Loos was not responsible for the horrible play by Clara Booth Luce.
No,
that was an
true.
Enormous hit, and where the initial conservative material comes from.
Right, but the gender stereotypes, the ideas about how genders play off each other are the same in both films, but The Women, what makes it such a horrifying film is that the man is off stage and therefore seems to have some kind of value. Whereas this film, because we see what the man is,
yes,
or one of the men, or all of the men.
All of the men.
They're all fucking idiots, and it's clear that there's nothing to fight over. Actually works as a comedy. The Women does not work because there's no reason for these people to be fighting over this ass Stephen who is never shown.
Don't have an auteur. It is the director who finally sets the tone of the film. Cukor chooses the tone that he wants for The Women.
Awful.
And gay men have loved it for generations since, but I'm not a gay man. Well, sometimes I am in my tastes, but not in this case. And I do like what Jack Conway has done in this movie much better. It's really a movie that has its cake and eats it too.
Yeah.
In that it never, only at brief moments, does it ever support the Harlow character openly. and it continually shifts perspectives between those who disapprove of her and her own perspective. Right?
Yeah, but her perspective is the fun one.
Her perspective is the fun one, so in that sense, she wins, always.
And the people who disapprove of her are almost entirely shown to be hypocrites.
Yeah, at key moments, her character is used to show up their hypocrisy, but because the movie never sentimentalizes her or tries to make her sympathetic, she is always this Moliere humor. She is always this caricature. She's always a comic villain. She never breaks outside of that mold herself, which is actually what makes it so fascinating that it lets her win.
It's amazing.
That the movie lets her win, ultimately. I mean, it's very instructive to compare this to Warner Brothers' version.
Babyface.
Babyface, another great pre-code movie.
Yeah.
Love it. But there is a class-based analysis of why this woman is doing what she's doing, and she does ultimately end up a sentimentalized character, whereas this movie, this MGM movie, wholly indicts the Harlow character and yet still allows her to triumph. How did he even get away with that? And obviously you are supposed to root for this character because Harlow was a star, and she is the star of this movie. She's not supposed to be someone you hate.
No, and
she's not even Betty Davis. It's not someone you love to hate.
It's a very unusual film, too, because this is the only time she played this kind of person.
Which
she's
would make
almost
her
always really lovable and fun. Here she's not lovable, but she's really fun.
Which would make it even more likely that the audience would sympathize with her, that she doesn't regularly play this type of character without having to be cued to sympathize with her, you know?
Well, this is still really early in the evolution of her persona at MGM, right?
So these seem to have been her first two big movies in this year, but obviously if they were going to star her in two movies, then she must have had buzz with audiences. What I find fascinating, we looked it up, according to the snippets of reviews given in the Wikipedia entry on Red-Headed Woman, the critical response was overwhelmingly positive and everybody loved this character. So like a gangster, this is a villain you're supposed to root for.
Yeah, and that's exactly how she's presented, right?
But then again, why is this a typical MGM movie then?
Lack of emphasis on class conflict, I think.
What do you mean? It's all about class conflict.
Let's put it this way. The lack of sympathetic interest in class conflict makes it different from Warner Brothers.
It does, but obviously the filmmakers want you to root for this woman and to see the people who are opposed to her as sexual and class hypocrites, and obviously that is how it was received. So is it just the studio bosses that don't know what they're doing? Is it just Mayer who didn't know how to read this film?
Mayer may not have known anything about it, right? This is not the era when Mayer was in charge of everything at the studio. Thalberg was. And Thalberg probably just thought it was a great script and was like, oh, let's do it. Not gonna hurt anyone.
But then is it just by chance that this is done completely differently than the way Warner Brothers does it?
I don't think it's by chance. I think Thalberg wouldn't have liked it if they had shown her growing up in a bar where she was being repeatedly raped by people that her dad was pimping her out to.
And her best friend being black.
It doesn't go into her roots. She's just an office girl who is really attractive and wants to get the most out of that. And we don't get any sense that she's been pushed around or abused. And her friend, who's also incredible, Una Merkel.
Wonderful, wonderful performance.
What a great confidant role for her, which is one of her specialties. Mocking confidant. She seems very content with her lot in life.
Except that she does get to come along for this whole ride.
Yeah, but she thinks Harlow is ridiculous, and she doubts her ability to execute each of her plans as she outlines them.
Well, let's talk about this character, because Una Merkel is the one thing in this movie that humanizes Harlow.
Yeah, they're good friends.
You can't actually ascribe any kind of psychology to their relationship. It's not like that. It's not like that. That's not how this is written. Granting that, you have to assume that this woman loves Harlow for some reason that we're not shown, and because she does, we know that we're allowed to.
Well, I think that it is a screwball comedy in that sense, because they are the pair that we care about. The world is a big joke between the two of them.
Well, except that Harlow doesn't seem to understand humor.
She loses it a little bit at the end, but she gets it back by the final scene.
Okay. And, of course, that's something Anita Loos brings to it from having written Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, where there is that female couple of gold diggers, the good friends.
Exactly.
Right? And she does have have this loyalty to Una Merkel. Like they joke about how Merkel won't be even invited to her new home once she's got this fabulous house with Mr. Legender.
Yeah, great name. Legendre would be the real way to pronounce
Mr.
it.
Legender. But then the next thing we see, Una Merkel's just inexplicably living with them.
Yeah.
And then she comes with her to New York, and she just comes with her everywhere, just hanging out, just kind of ogling Jean Harlow's crazy life and being her only real friend.
And the only person that actually matters. Everyone else is just material for Harlow to work on.
So Harlow does, like Barbara Stanwyck and Babyface, she does have a sort of class loyalty. The ambition doesn't have anything to do with that, with being ashamed of anything.
No, although there is that element to it a little bit, right?
Well,
or
there's
certainly
only
more and more of it.
There's only shame when they all get together to shame her.
Yeah, exactly.
Which she is too naive to even understand that this is a possibility.
And that's actually got some parallels with the way things go in Ruby Gentry, right?
Yes, I thought of that.
They're married now, but their social success has been thwarted by the concerted efforts of all of Bill's friends who refuse to acknowledge that any of this has happened because of their loyalty to Layla Hyams.
So really the satire of Luz and Conway goes in both directions, but ultimately just because she is such a force of energy and such a force for blowing up bourgeois hypocrisy, ultimately it does side with Harlow, even openly. But it doesn't sentimentalize her.
No, she's a terrible person.
And it doesn't psychologize her, but it still sides with her. So that's just what I find fascinating about the two different studios' way of handling this material.
It's a very instructive double feature, for sure. Now, we had a different double feature today, which gives us two sides of Jean Harlow. But yes, watching it in conjunction with Babyface can really tell you some interesting things.
The joke that it makes of the men, the hilarious joke that it makes of these men.
When you hear that Mike Pence can't have any moments alone with a woman, this is basically what he's saying he is like, and all men are like, as far as he's concerned. If you're left alone with a woman, you will have sex with them, if they encourage you.
Now, for this first third of the movie, up until, Chester Morris actually marries her, it does seem like it's more or less being played straight as she's a terrifying Fatal Attraction villain, except, with comedic touches.
Very comedic, yes.
And, the family values crap is being played straight. This is what an evil, sexual, predatory woman looks like, and this is the kind of home she's going to ruin, right? And then it gets more complicated in tone after that.
Yeah.
But, initially, Jean Harlow kind of more or less rapes Chester Morris into marrying.
The build-up to that is quite something, right? So she tells him, and I guess us as well, in passing, that she's had her heart set on him for quite a while. Sort of the way Stella Dallas acts with Stephen Dallas at the beginning of that film, right? She cuts his picture out of the paper.
Yeah.
Now, Stella doesn't put his image in a little locket on her garter.
Garter locket.
That's an amazing scene. So she goes around with this good luck charm under her skirts at all times. She has set things up. She's got a job at his office, and now she's finally got her opportunity. He's at home with a cold, and she's going to deliver mail to him and suggest that she help him handle it instead of his usual secretary, who he tells us, he prefers to work with a much less attractive woman. He can't trust himself alone with Jean Harlow. He loves his wife. He doesn't want to lose his marriage.
They grew up together. They're from the same class. Everybody in his business and family knows him and his wife. Then there's an ellipsis, and the fact that she's on the couch weeping afterwards, even though, there's no hair or piece of clothing out of place, allows us to know that they have had sex. Even in the pre-code era, there's not much you can show, I guess.
No, of course not. It was a code, that's the thing, right? The code existed, it just wasn't being enforced very heavily.
It's just that there was a much bigger wink and nudge during scenes like this in the pre-code. So, we are to know that they've had sex, and he's sitting there, this perfectly cast waxen actor is sitting there and just being like, well, dear, you shouldn't take this too seriously, It's
really interesting here, too, right? Chester Morris is basically, he was a huge MGM star, And this movie today shows us, I think, what was going on at MGM. They now had Clark Gable. They did not need Chester Morris anymore. Because he's basically Gable without charisma. He's the same kind of guy.
Sure.
And he was playing Gable roles until they got the real Gable. And then they're like, okay, well, we'll let him be a laughingstock in this movie. And then he's basically gone after that.
So Gable is Chester Morris if Chester Morris had, a complex screen persona.
Yeah.
Which he really doesn't.
And a straight nose.
Yeah, he's kind of weird looking too.
But he was a real matinee idol in the early 30s.
Harlow seems to think he is. Anyway, yeah, so they've had sex and he says, yeah, but don't take this seriously because my wife is coming home tonight.
Tomorrow. He thinks it's tomorrow.
He thinks it's tomorrow.
Unfortunately for him, he's wrong.
Because his wife is just so eager to get back to him.
Yeah, his wife is Layla Hyams. I like her. She doesn't get to do much in this movie. She's likable enough in it. The movie doesn't satirize her too heavily.
No, she's never responsible for the worst things that happen to Jean Harlow, even though Jean Harlow assumes that she is.
She has a nice kind of bantering relationship with her aunt, good old May Robson, who will be an indispensable 30s character actress.
Sure.
And they talk about this on their way home, that, maybe it's not such a good idea to get home a day early. You might find out something you don't want to find out about the way your husband behaves.
May Robson is joking about this.
Yeah, but not really.
No, of course not. But the whole thing, the way this is all set up, this first third of the movie, is to give us the feeling of, if it weren't for Jean Harlow's psychotic, predatory ambition, this man would never have slipped up on his own.
Well, no, because he has taken precautions. He won't be alone with an attractive woman. And
yes, he's taken all due precautions.
That's the moral responsibility that a man has under this film's gender conventions. A man is not responsible if he has sex with a woman who won't leave him alone, but he can usually make that not happen. If someone goes around that and just won't play fair,
well, like I said,
you just have to have sex with them, and that's all there is to it.
Sure, but like I said, during this whole first portion of the film, it seems like that's all being played straight.
Yeah, exactly.
But then it gets crazy. Once his wife catches him, she says, I wouldn't have minded so if it wasn't that kind of girl, a girl like that. And he says, but sometimes it is just a girl like that. And right there you can just, because it's not really an attempt at justification, it's more of a comment on the
gender.
The ridiculousness of gender and marriage in this conservative family value system where you marry the woman who you have honorable feelings towards, and honorable feelings can't include sexual feelings.
No, they have to be really tamped down at the most. Now, there have to be some sexual feelings, right? Because the movie does make it clear she punishes him by not sleeping with him anymore.
Well, he's a man, Dave. He needs some kind of sheer physical release.
She's not allowing that.
But
Harlow gets wind of it because she has all kinds of sources of information within his household, the chauffeur.
Well, the wife, it's quite obvious that she is the type who does not have any sexual feelings, so it can only be used as a way to punish or control her husband.
Yeah.
Jean Harlow seems at first like she is surely using sex for manipulation, but by the end we find out that she actually does enjoy it.
She does enjoy it, but just not with the people that she's manipulating.
Yeah, it's hard to find both. Well, I mean, initially she thinks she's found both handsomeness and money together, but then it turns out that, the town is too disapproving.
Well, it's not only that, though, right? I think that that's a really important point here. She finds out when she marries him that he actually doesn't have the kind of power that she thought he had. He can't compel the town to respect her, and that's it. He's no longer attractive to her.
Oh, you think?
At that point.
You think that's a turning point?
Oh, it's a major turning point, because then she decides to move on to the guy a rank above him, who is like Andrew Carnegie or something, like a gigantic magnate. Chester Morris is just a little businessman in a hick town.
But this is where things splinter for her, because to have that kind of power, you have to be
70.
Yeah, you have to be 70, a 70-year-old millionaire.
It's all leading to the amazing scene where she says, "I'm in love, and I'm getting married." And of course, her indispensable straight man is there next to her saying, "You're in love with this old guy?" Well, no. You're gonna marry the chauffeur? No. I'm just gonna do both. That's all.
So let's talk about this movie in terms of acts. So Act 1 is where it's Fatal Attraction, but funnier. And she forces Chester Morris to sleep with her and then to marry her.
Yeah, I mean, the scene where they finally come together for good is absolutely insane. I mean,
where he beats
she locks
her.
him in, he punches her around, and she refuses to give up the key. And then finally, she puts it down her blouse, and he has to go get it. And then, of course, he can't control himself.
Right, and then there's this scene...
All with Una Merkel listening in on the other side of the door.
There's a blackout right after he comes toward her. There's a blackout, and then there's the sound of the courtroom gavel, which is standing which is standing in for both him beating her and him having sex with her.
Yeah, quite something.
That's actually a point of continuity between the two movies, in that the primal way in which Jean Harlow arouses the sexual feelings of these men is both indistinguishable from violence, and also, because they want so hard to resist these dark urges of their own, also manifests itself as violence toward her. Right?
Yeah.
And then we see him, initially he seems to be going on this downward slide of degradation.
Which includes marrying Jean Harlow.
Right? That's like the nadir. But then we see the sick way in which they relate to each other sexually, which actually made me start thinking ahead to the MGM Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where she starts crooking her finger at him and calling to him in her baby voice, even more baby voice than usual.
Oh, Bill!
Bill!
And Jack Conway will use that again. He also is in love with William Powell in Live Old Lady, and his name is Bill. And of course, she was in love with Bill Powell for real.
Oh, really?
In 1936. They were engaged when she died.
Oh, that's very sad. At the end of that scene, where they're relating to each other this way, and she asks him if she's prettier than his ex-wife, and we see this poor guy, I mean, he's ridiculous and everything, but within the movie's terms, he's being tormented by the fact that he actually does love his ex-wife, but he can't seem to find a way to get around his attraction to Harlow, and so he's ended up here, and he's the kind of man that if I'm going to keep sleeping with it, I've got to marry it. He was drunk anyway when he did it. We find that out from May Robson.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes, you would have stood by him if he had the smallpox. I mean, he is sick.
He has a sickness.
He has a sickness, or he's psychotic, or he's mad, or something. Right?
Help him!
And that's when she tries to, but she finds out that they're married. Anyway, at the close of this scene, she asks if she's prettier than the ex-wife, and then he tells her, "You're the most beautiful thing in the world." So I guess we are to conclude that he's the kind of guy that if he is married, he has to believe that there is some kind of higher feeling behind it.
Yeah.
Right? So it actually looks like, so now he's going to do his best in this marriage, so it looks like they could be okay, and he could make the most of it, and she gets what she wants.
Trouble comes because he's exposed as second-tier power figure. He just doesn't have what it takes.
So this is Act 2, Jean Harlow against the town.
And we hear about the dynamics, again from Una Merkel, as she is giving Harlow a makeover, or whatever she's doing, some weekly maintenance.
Well, she works in a beauty shop.
Harlow is talking about, the arrival of this big man, Henry Stevenson, great actor, and he is one of America's foremost industrialists. There's a stag affair occurring where they're going to talk over business, and Una Merkel is like, "No, it's not. Everyone's going except for you. Look, it's right here in the newspaper. Maybe you should take a look at that sometimes." And Harlow is insulted, of course. And Chester Morris has been keeping all of this from her because he knows he can't change it, and he knows it will enrage her. And of course, above Chester Morris, there's Louis Stone. We shouldn't forget, Louis Stone was a big star of the era, right? Like, he's in Grand Hotel. He is the 7th star of Grand Hotel. He's Judge Hardy, so an integral figure of the immensely popular...
Daddy Legender?
Yeah.
Right.
So he is watching all of this with his stern face, writing checks occasionally to try to buy her off or get her out of town for his fool son. He's the only one she doesn't try to seduce. He's immune to that. He's not any older than Henry Stevenson.
Or maybe she has her limits or her pragmatism that she's not going to try to have an affair with her father-in-law.
Yeah, maybe.
Because seduce for her seems to mean going all the way. It's not just flirting or enticing.
No.
As we find out. So she wants to run into Bigwig.
Yeah, well, Henry Stevenson's the actor's name. He's got a kind of a German name, the character. I forget, Grensky or...
Anyway, she wants to have it arranged because he's supposed to be, ultra conservative and
judgmental.
And also very good friends with the ex-wife's family.
Yes.
So he won't have anything to do with her, and she says, well, we'll just see about that as long as I can run into him. He's a man. Right? And so me forgetting this plot, I remembered her as just kind of acting seductively and twisting him around her finger, but no, she goes straight for sexual blackmail.
Yeah, the next scene, after we hear her talking about trying to run into him, he is getting dressed again after some sex and looking very sheepish, as he's just been told who she is. He just figures she's some floozy.
We don't really know how this happened.
No, we don't need to know it. It's funnier this way.
So she threatens him with, you're going to go outside, you're meeting a bunch of your friends today, so you're going to go out there and you're going to tell them that you're throwing a party, or we're throwing a party in your honor at our home, and everyone has to come. And if you don't, I'm going to
burst out of your bedroom and explain that we've just been having sex.
No, she says, I'm going to make a scene that Shakespeare couldn't top.
An amazing line.
And
yes.
That's where we get the Desdemona handkerchief scene.
Yes.
Which is discovered by Daddy Legender. Her name engraved on it.
Yeah.
Or, is that engraved? That's not engraved.
Knitted or stitched into it.
Her name's stitched on the handkerchief.
Again, he will be the detective throughout, or the person that hires detectives. He is the only one who is able to sort of play on her level.
So, in the melodrama version, it is kind of almost a melodrama versus comedy again.
Yeah.
As in Red Dust. Within the melodrama version of this plot, he is the one who ultimately exposes this hypocrite, like Hedda Gabler or whoever, and that's the end of her, and the good guys win, and everything returns to normal.
Yeah, basically, like Jean Raymond and Mary Astor, they get to go back to having the kind of life that an upper middle class American expects to have.
Sure, although they would, in this version, be the protagonists and not the people who are shipped off at the end of the movie.
He shows that he does have the power to compel the entire town to at least put in an appearance at this house that they've all shunned. In Ruby Gentry, she has to just basically do it herself and bankrupt everybody.
Henry Stevenson, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even he can't actually control their minds. So they all go, they pay obeisance to this command, but then they all beg off early and go across the street to the home of Layla Hyams, who is the person that they really care about.
And because the satire is cutting all ways, and actually I guess that technically is what satire is. Satire is just satire of everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Across the board, it doesn't recognize it recognizes moral norms, but not moral values. We have seen many scenes that are just making fun of Harlow for being so enormously vulgar, and that's another kind of thing that you wouldn't see in a Warner Brothers movie.
No, not at all.
Right, so we see her dressed up too much with her greyhound and her flashy furs and her flashy feathers and her flashy car, right? And we see her parading around the house, acting vulgar out, asking why nobody likes her, and it's like, ha ha, ha ha, obviously you will never fit in with this class. And now we see the result of that. We know that this is how they've all judged her.
Yeah.
But now the joke's on them, actually.
The joke is on them, but then it's also on Harlow.
It is.
Una Merkel is right there on the spot to observe the machinations so that they can save face by going to Harlow's party, but then retiring to the really cool after party across the street. Harlow comes in, sees Merkel peering out the window, kicks her in the ass, so she feels like she's got one up on the world, but then Merkel turns around and cuts her down to size again, right? So nobody gets away without cuts.
This ought to actually put the audience on Harlow's side, the fact that en masse these people have decided to snub her.
Well, they're gross, yeah.
But, as usually happens, Harlow just reacts like primally to this slight and acts completely crazy and ruins our sympathy for her.
Yeah, because we're not supposed to be sympathetic. We're just supposed to be enjoying the comedic performance.
Right? So she runs across the street, Fatal Attraction style again, and starts shrieking about how the ex-wife is out to destroy her, and of course she has nothing to do with any of it. What's her name? Irene.
He calls her Reen.
Right. How this is all Irene plotting against her, which just, anytime she has a chance to act morally superior to anybody, she ruins it.
Yeah, but then she's done with these fucks anyway. She has a plan B, right? Which is, okay, I've still got Henry Stevenson. He's a stepping stone to a much larger arena.
But she doesn't know what Daddy Legender knows about her and how this could all end up blowing up in her face.
No, that's one thing she doesn't anticipate.
This plot is brewing in the background here. We think that we have a trap set for her. And just as in a melodrama like Hedda Gabler, no matter how awful the person that they're plotting against, as soon as there is like a sort of blackmail plot or a plot to foil anybody's schemes of getting ahead, right?
Yeah.
As soon as there is that plot hatching against you, that automatically creates sympathy for the character.
Well, she calls Lewis Stone a dirty gum-chewing hypocrite, which he is.
Yeah.
So.
But she delivers it in such a way that you can't even cheer for her in that scene.
Not really.
The comedy is very complex in all of these scenes.
It is.
But anyway, so then we get to Act 3, which is the most over-the-top, outrageous, and hilarious.
Yeah. So she moves to New York, barges in on Henry Stevenson, who, like Chester Morris, tries his best to set limits and put up protection for himself against the Harlow whirlwind, but she breaks through and gets to him on the balcony, and he is powerless to resist. So they are on a collision course with marriage at that point.
Now, for the first time, when they're just dancing together, and Una Merkel is, of course, there, dancing with an even older guy, when they're just dancing together in New York at a nightclub, she really genuinely seems happy. So if she were just this purely ambitious woman who uses sex instrumentally, this would be the point where she's got everything she wants, and maybe she can have a happy relationship now, right?
Yes, but no, she has split off into two beings. One who has this ambition and the other who wants to have fun with Charles Boyer.
Yep,
who is the chauffeur. Inevitably, this is all going to be exposed.
Well, it's not at all inevitable. It seems brilliant and perfect, except for the fact that Daddy Legender has got the detectives on her.
On the case. We cut to the chase here. Chester Morris comes back into the story. He shows up in New York. He's been permanently wised up now about his wife. He's not even annoyed that she is setting up to marry Henry Stevenson. He just wants to ruin everybody's life by showing off these spiffy pictures he's got. The pièce de résistance, of course.
Which really does make him seem petty and disgusting.
Yeah. So it's pictures of Harlow all around the town, at the beach, having a great time with the chauffeur. And then there's this one, the last one, with Henry Stevenson, this doddering old fool, tying his shoelace on the running board of his car while she's kissing the chauffeur right behind him.
Yeah, but the completely anti-realistic joke is that the chauffeur has his chauffeur outfit on in every single photo, even at the beach.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, he's always on call, right? So he does have to have that outfit on.
At the beach!
Yeah.
It's absolutely riotous.
She does go back home to this town. Here we get the final confrontation with Chester Morris and Layla Hyams, who are reunited back together finally. May Robson's happy, Lewis Stone is happy.
Frankly, at this point, if she is going to take him back after all of this, they deserve each other.
And she takes responsibility. Again, in this movie, we don't have to take these fuckers seriously. In The Women, we do. Norma Shearer in that movie is responsible for her husband straying to Joan Crawford because she's not sexually exciting enough. And she has to put on jungle red nail polish and go out and claw back her man. And it's all supposed to be meaningful for some reason in The Women. Obviously, it is a satire as well. The movie does want you to feel like there's something at stake there.
Play was a massive hit.
And in this movie,
I assume
Chester Morris and Layla Hyams, who cares if they're back together or not? Only May Robson and Lewis Stone care.
Yeah, no, we are totally not expected to care.
No, because they hi-hat her and they've done this disgusting gumshoeing, which is reprehensible. She is incensed and she wants a final showdown with Chester Morris.
This is her wildest outbreak yet.
It's not just words anymore. She has a gun. I mean, we don't even know she has a gun until she uses it, but...
Well, no, like, on my first viewing, when I wasn't quite understanding the comedy as much, I did feel like she got thrown under the bus in this moment, because this is the only time she does something that I just think is absolutely psychotic and reprehensible.
Well, it is psychotic, but basically she's been psychotic all along, and it has been slowly building toward this comedy set piece, this master stroke of her shooting this idiot and making their car crash into a lamp.
What do they say about an unstoppable force and an unmovable object? Well, Chester Morris's morality is ultimately the immovable object. He can't just relax and marry her. Nobody can just relax and give her what she wants. And so ultimately it's going to come to the point where she's just shooting him. That is how her love for him has been basically from the beginning.
Yeah, and so she did have some real feelings for him, and he disappointed her so badly that she has to shoot him. Just like Mary Astor had to shoot Clark Gable. And it's actually the same result. It's not a deadly wound, so nobody has to go to jail, apparently.
But we do hear all of this bourgeois gossip about it as everyone looks at their newspaper the next morning, including some children asking about why this happened.
But since Morris is alive, he declines to press charges.
He just wants to get far away from this whole situation.
They've wanted her to leave town from the beginning, and she finally does after this. 2 years later, we move across the Atlantic to Paris. The insipid bourgeois couple are at a racetrack having insipid fun. When a middle class or upper middle class couple is supposed to be having placeholder fun in a 30s movie, they're always at the racetrack.
Sure.
And that's what's happening here. They've got Louis Stone with them as well. And ever observant, he has his binoculars out and notices in the winner's circle with the owner of the horse who triumphed in the Derby is Jean Harlow, now the toast of France. And she has learned to speak French, as she said she wanted to.
Yeah, what did she say? Because there's no translation.
It's all in French, actually. She's not speaking really all that well, but she's saying this will touch me for the rest of my life, how much I've been embraced by you here in Paris.
Yeah, and it kind of looks like her punishment might be that now she can only get really old men.
Yeah, with a ridiculous goat beard.
But, of course, she gets into the car and we see that Charles Boyer is driving. So now they're a team.
They are a team, and we don't know what happened to Una Merkel. That's the only loose end here.
Oh, she's at home.
Probably, yeah. And that's it. So yeah, she does get everything she wants. Presumably she is married or will marry this old guy, and she's got her chauffeur, and there's no more detectives on her tail, so she can have her cake and eat it too.
And maybe they've learned to play it a little safe, like he says to her about the photo where Stevenson is tying his shoe with his back turned to them. I knew we were taking a risk that day. I told you we were taking a risk.
Yeah.
So maybe they're a little better at their act now. So that's Red-Headed Woman, another 5-star movie, I think.
This was an incredible week in the studios year by year. A banner week.
All right, what have we got next week?
Next week, we are going to be doing our retrospective show on Call Me Jimmy, the films of James Stewart, which we saw half of in person at TIFF, the Lightbox Theater.
Oh my god, I am so looking forward to this. It's going to be another long one, though, Dave.
Yeah, the other half we have been watching at home, as all of you have been doing, no doubt, as we're all sequestered in our various domiciles.
I have only left the house once in the past week.
Yeah, we've been having everything delivered. We're working from home. Hopefully,
actually 2 weeks, but I'm going out tomorrow, although I don't want to. I must.
Hopefully all of you out there are doing okay, health-wise and economically.
We do have someone to thank this week.
Yes, we got a new review on iTunes.
This is the first review that we've had for the film version of this podcast. The latest version of this podcast.
Yeah, the others are all referring to our time travel film podcast, which lasted for a couple of years, or Twin Peaks.
Twin Peaks, where we were not highly embraced by the fandom.
No, not really.
Although we did get a lot of new listeners. I guess there were those who were violently opposed to us, and then those who were indifferent.
But thank you, Lil Marco Rubenstein, for your fine review. We hope that you're still out there listening and enjoying things, and that life is good for you and for everyone else during this very difficult time.
We didn't get any reviews during comics version of our podcast, although we did get a lot of letter interaction, and we would surely love to have that again. So if you, Marco Rubenstein, or anybody else would like to send us a missive that you can specify that we do or do not discuss on the air or on mic, that would give us great pleasure.
Next week, expect discussion of basically the contours of Stewart's career, all the different facets of his persona as it evolved, and some pointed discussion about Naked Spur and probably some other set-piece films as well, but we haven't quite settled on them yet.
No, there's too much to choose from.
We'll see you then.